I've run a development company for 3 years. We've worked with over 15, different clients, and we've built many, many projects for them, many applications. And we've done a lot of scoping work through that. This is a really tactical, low-level guide on how I think good scoping works. This is a guide on how to scope projects well in the kind of development space as a whole from what we've learned. This is good if you're a development agency and you struggle with this kind of process, or if you're somebody who wants to go into a software project and you're worried about how to scope things or how to plan your application. With that said, I'll get right into it. The first thing that I want to point out is that scoping is not a proposal. So, if you're a software agency or a freelancer of any sort and you want to do some kind of proposal, a scoping document that understands what the client needs is different from a proposal. A proposal or pitch deck is what you pitch a client with. And so this is about kind of showing what your company is about and how you work and things like that. It's not about the technical requirements of what you're actually building. That is a scoping document. A pitch is a different document which is meant to show why you are a trustworthy person to build something, not to show what exactly you are building by the millimeter. You're not pitching with the blueprint, you're pitching with why you're a good person to go with overall. I made this mistake when I started where I would basically make a proposal and scoping document all in one, and I'd wrap it up into a Google Doc and send it over, and it was a terrible idea. I now have pitch decks, so presentations, and then I have scoping documents. They're separate things. When I make a proposal, I've already done the scoping document. And so we've aligned on what they're building, and now I'm presenting why we'd be a good fit to build for them. But what they're building should not be the proposal itself. It's a part of a proposal, but it is not the proposal itself. Second quick point I want to hit on is that good scoping is based on good questions. It's all about just asking the right questions. That's really it. And you'll see this in this process, but it's basically about asking a bunch of questions. That's really it. Now, to get into the nitty-gritty process, basically, first thing that we do is do an initial briefing and figure out what the client wants. So from high level, what are they trying to build? What is the application that they're trying to get at? We want to figure out what's the feature set, what's the things that they want the application to do, what's the problem they're trying to solve, and things like that. It's a very broad thing, and it's a call with me and the client, and we go through, okay, what's going on? What are we trying to build here? What are we eventually trying to accomplish? From that, we want to get a feature list. That's the kind of main priority, right? The second step is breaking that down into projects. So, I call them projects, some people call them sprints, whatever, but projects are things that take like 1 to 2 weeks, right? So they should be bite-sized chunks where you focus on something very, very specific. For example, from a scoping document that we actually did internally, we might have some projects which are authentication, multi-tenancy architecture, the admins page, the user profile page, the activity page, the explore page, the projects page, the external link features, whatever. These are all different things. Within those, we want to plan what is the minimum that we would have to do in order to complete that particular feature. And so we want to write down all the bullet points that we understand that this feature requires. And that leads us into the third step, which is based on those bullet points, what questions do we have? So we create these documents for each project, and we go through and we ask, okay, well, this is what we understand from the feature. Here are the questions that we still have. For example, what metrics or indicators do we use to measure progress? Will there be a confirmation process to prevent accidental deletion? Things like that, small details. This is where you want to really understand the nitty-gritty details of each individual project. So it should be very focused on one specific feature, and it should be questions that are very, very specific to that feature. And you want to ask as many as possible. And one of the key parts here is we want to write down what the client says, who said it, and when they said it. And the reason is, if there is any debate in the future, right, about, who said, he said, if there's any debate in the future about who said what, there's no arguments about he said, she said, whatever. It's just you can go back and look at the document and say, oh, okay, you want it blue, but your colleague said red 2 months ago. And so that's why we made it red. It wasn't just us. It's really important to track this kind of stuff because it helps with transparency a lot. You rinse and repeat that for every single project. So you find a project, you write down what you understand of it, you ask a bunch of questions, and you go through several rounds. You get the client to answer the questions, you write down who answered when, and if you have more questions based on their answers, then you do that again, right? So you go back to the client, you ask them any new answers, I have these new questions, let's write them down, let's figure it all out. And then you move into the building phase. So, assuming that you win the project and stuff, basically you lock in only one project at a time. So let's say you start on the first project, let's say authentication, you lock in the scope of that project and you say, okay, this is what we're gonna build. We're not changing the scope of this project anymore, so for the next 1 to 2 weeks, and we're just gonna focus on building the minimum features for this specific project. We're not going to worry about how we're going to implement project number 10. We're just focused on this one and building the minimum thing we need just for this project to be ticked off. And then as we do that, we sort out any final questions that we might have with project number 2. As we reach the completion of project number 1 and we move into project number 2, we lock the scope on project number 2 and finalize the scope on project number 3. So you should always have the questions kind of all done, but you can allow for some flexibility for the client as you move through the projects, but just lock them in when you start working on them individually. For me, that was really helpful because it meant that we could maintain some degree of flexibility with a client while also not getting messed over by having to change what we're building on the fly. And building just what we needed for that next project made it really easy to not build stuff that we'd later have to re-engineer or delete. That was a really great breakthrough for us. This is obviously a framework for application development. I think you can apply it to different things. You might be able to take bits and bobs from it. So whatever you're able to take from it, I hope it's useful. But it's how we've scoped projects for a while. I think it's useful as a scoping process for lots of different organizations. So I think it's a video that's hopefully useful for a lot of people. But in any case, ask any questions if you have them in the comments. I read those and I make videos every day, so I have opportunities to respond to those in video form. Yeah, if you made it this far, I mean, I appreciate you watching and I hope you got something out of it.